Dan Perry is the former chairman of the Foreign Press Association of Israel. He joins us live from Tel Aviv. Good to have you with us. So we've talked about the prospects of a ceasefire before. Now I want to focus on some of the internal dynamics going on within Israel. First of all, how unified is the Israeli cabinet at this point, as you read it, over the question of whether to end the war?
Fairly unified. I would say there are some ministers that have come out in public and suggested that the government should do more, should try harder to do at least a partial deal, but none of them have actually said that the government should bite the bullet and end the war entirely as Hamas demands in exchange for all the hostages. That's, of course, very different from the picture you get if you look at Israeli society at large.
Well, that was going to be my next point. How does that compare with the evolving position of public opinion within Israel?
I would say Israeli public opinion has sort of lost patience with the situation, and polls consistently show that 70% or more are in fact favor an end to the war and in exchange for all the hostages. Now, they do this through gritted teeth because almost no one in Israel, I would say 0%, and that may include the Israeli Arab citizens, really wants Hamas to remain in power in Gaza. But they sort of see this dragging on and becoming a forever war, not unlike the insurrection the Americans faced in Iraq. Could go on for years. The hostages are dying. And there is a theory that has, I believe, majority support in the public that says, all right, let it be. What's done is done. Get back whatever hostages are alive. And if Hamas, rearms and tries to attack once more and provokes you again, then you go back in, but this time without one hand tied behind your back, which is more or less a situation given that Hamas has the hostages. I understand that people look at all the destruction in Gaza and it doesn't look like one hand is tied. But the fact is, if Hamas wasn't holding these hostages, then they probably would have more quickly been able to do what they did with Hezbollah and essentially destroy their fighting force and their leadership.
Right. The last polls, you mentioned polls, the last polls that I saw about a couple of weeks ago spoke of a rise in popularity for the Likud party over others. Does that strengthen Netanyahu at all within the cabinet? Does it reduce his reliance on some or the leverage of some of the coalition partners?
No, it doesn't. And I have to quibble with your reading of that poll. Yeah, it shows Likud is up maybe 2 seats, but at the expense of other parties in the coalition. The actual poll that matters is the larger picture of the blocks. There is a Netanyahu bloc, which at this point is pure right-wing, plus religious, and there is the rest of the country. And that is pretty much settled for a year now in a situation where Netanyahu has 50 out of 120 seats. Now, note that in the last election, he won 64, a small majority. He has not passed 50 in any poll that I've seen, including one yesterday. And this, I have to say, surprises me somewhat because they have had successes in recent months, but it hasn't moved the needle. And the needle is where it is because of anger over the stupendous failures that led to October 7th, the inability to finish the war more quickly, and also some degree of suspicion on behalf of a considerable portion of Israeli society that Netanyahu is playing games and prolonging the war because of his political survival calculations.
All right, Dan Perry there, thank you so much. Dan Perry is the former chairman of the Foreign Press Association of Israel. Joins us live from Tel Aviv. Good to have you with us. So we can see the public pressure continuing there. Talking about the domestic dynamics and politics of this, how is that impacting the unity of the Israeli cabinet on the question of ending the war?
I haven't heard voices in the Israeli cabinet calling for accepting Hamas's conditions to end the war in exchange for the hostages and leave Hamas in power. They're not there yet, but there is a debate within the cabinet about the degree to which Israel should be flexible, as Qatar has asked it to be in recent days, in hopes of at least a partial deal, I would say. But what is really animating the resilience of the Israeli cabinet are polls that consistently show that they would lose an election if it were held today. And so they're a little bit fearful of ending the war on terms that would cause the far right to leave, precipitating new elections.
How does that cabinet position sit with the evolving public opinion, though?
Public opinion seems to have plateaued in a situation where about 70% want an end to the war, and a slightly smaller majority, maybe close to 60%, maybe a bit less, 58, would vote against the governing coalition if elections were held today. There is great frustration at the fact that the war continues without any apparent exit plan or long-term strategy vis-a-vis Gaza. Now, look, all Israelis, pretty close to all Israelis, did support the goal of eradicating Hamas, but the war seems to be just settling into a long-term insurgency with all the messiness that we see, with the claims that you just aired about Israel deliberately targeting various forms of civilians, just the misery, and Israeli soldiers dying. I think there's a lot of impatience to somehow finish all this, and the government seems to be disinterested in a quick end.
All right, thanks so much, Dan Perry there.